The night was still. Such silence, his pounding heart was echoing so loudly the only competing sound was his panicked breath, deep and shuddering, almost in rhythm with the quaking pulse jutting through him. I have to keep moving, he thought. Or maybe he said it out loud. He couldn't tell anymore. Whipped by branches and shivering for warmth, he wasn't even sure where he was going anymore. Just had to get away. Had to get away. Stupid rocks, he said. This time he knew he said it, because he repeated it several times. That's all he cared about anymore. Ever since that stupid traveler melted when he saw him. From that moment on, he was obsessed. And it was true. The strange man spoke at great lengths of the riches these stones could bring. The goods he happily forked over was a ludicrous deal for 3 mere stones. 3 measly stones. The man left with such a start, promising to bring more riches and more who would see the value in these stones. We couldn't believe it was true. We both joked and laughed about how this must be some shared dream. That maybe our friend put those berries in our drinks again. But after all the celebrations and parties died down, after we woke up, the riches laid all around us still. This was no dream, sadly. If only it were. You see, that was the day it happened. When my friend became absorbed. When it swallowed him. That is the day my friend, my brother, died. And this thing, whatever that thing is, was born. There was the sound again. It was close. We had been wandering for several moons, following every false trail, every bad instinct that led us further and further from everything we knew. Just a little further, he said. All to find these stupid rocks. I swore I packed enough food and I was right, he said to himself as he ran, still seething about the betrayal. His friend had taken them in the night, meaning to speed up the search and somehow get faster results. Tricking his companion to believe they were taken in the night. They decided they could hunt, they would be fined. Easy. That was before an early blizzard set in, causing their tracks to be lost, game to become scarce, and the climate unhospitable. They had to take refuge in a nearby cave. It was damp, wide, and open, providing little windshield. We began to make camp, and I remember the entire time he kept his head down, shifting his gaze. I was concerned with his growing and changing quirks, but I found survival to be more important. So I managed to get a fire going and quickly filled the area with light. Relieved, I let out a sigh and sat by the fire. Then a sudden noise startled me. A low gasp, deep and long, mixed with a sort of growl. I quickly turned to see him with a look on his face that I will never forget, and it will haunt my dying days. And in his hand was one of those damn stones. His face looked sunken, different. His eyes were sunk in his head. His hair looked all matted up and were those clumps missing? His face had stretched longer somehow, which in turn made his jaws and teeth appear longer and sharper. Was the light playing tricks on him? He blinked hard, tried to shake his head, tried to wake up, but no. There his friend stood before him. What was his friend? This thing. All this time he spent taking in this grotesque imagery he was looking at. His friend, or what was left of him, didn't move an inch. Just stared into the palm of his hand at that tiny colored rock, as if the entire world around him just stood still. Clearly jarred, I sputtered out a "what?" but stopped sharply as his eyes locked onto mine. I couldn't finish. I was struck with such gut-wrenching fear when his eyes found me. They found me. As if he forgot I was there and I had somehow interrupted on some very private and personal moment. I was no longer his friend. His eyes no longer saw his brother. His empty eyes had located a target. Another growling moan escaped his lips as he swung his hand at me. It caught my shoulder and drew blood. Were those claws? I had no time to think. My body instinctively stepped back and turned to run. As I ran into the snow and the trees, an inhuman howl sent a shrill down my neck, and I ran even faster. No longer making sense of direction or time. Tripping and stumbling, I flew faster than my legs could carry me. These trees are endless. I'll never find my way out. That thing, it must have brought me here on purpose. And that's when I saw it. The nail in the coffin. Hanging just an eye shot on a branch. There it was. My satchel. Filled with food. The one that had gone missing. I knew it. It was all a trick. I ran to it and tried to get it down. As I reached up to try to get it down, a sharp sting, followed by warm fluid, ran across my leg. I faltered, looked, and there it was. That damn thing. It had grown somehow. It was almost twice as tall. The eyes were little holes in its skull. Its lips had totally shriveled back, and its claws were very visibly sharp now. I screamed and ran, now limping from my leg wound, looking back, expecting it to be right on my heels. But it wasn't. It just stood there, staring at me, watching me. Then it jumped straight up, out of sight, and vanished. I ran and I ran, but I knew I was losing stride, and hope, and blood, and leaving a trail that it would very easily follow. I stumbled into a clearing, gasped for breath, dropped down to one knee. The howl came again. It was close, too close, and so very cold. It came slowly lurching out of the darkness at him. He looked into the creature's eyes as it drew near him. He was done running. He knew how it ended. So he stared into those black depths that were once his brother's eyes. He remembered fond memories, and he braced himself as it drew him up by his throat. It held him high into the air, the emptiness staring back at him. Its jaws opened wider and wider. Whispers of the Wendigo has swept far across the Great Plain for generations. Often claimed to be an evil spirit that possesses humans. Depicted as an enormous, human-like creature with a heart of ice. Its presence is often accompanied by a chill in the air or a horrid stench. Most demons are stinky, and for some reason present-day pop culture has put antlers on them. No records from indigenous people ever mention antlers. This is much like horned Viking helms, though. Those are added by modern interpretations. So, modern folks find horns scary? Or is it being horny that's scary? I thought horns was a great cinematic step for Daniel Radcliffe. Go watch it. The Wendigo has roots in the traditions of many Algonquin-speaking people, including my butchered pronunciation of Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Cree, Naskapi, and Innu. Isn't that one fun to say? Naskapi. So many variations kinda leave room for interpretation, but honestly, it doesn't change much. Mostly an evil, cannibalistic, supernatural horror associated with winter, the north, freezing, and famine, with a sprinkle of starving alone in the woods. Some cultures described it as an endless hunger that was never sated. Once it ate, it would immediately grow, therefore needing more to sustain its larger body. It was perpetually starving and emaciated. Some cultures claim it would retain cognitive ideas such as speech and planning. It would lure people into its grasp with the voices of lost loved ones. Sometimes it would taunt them as they inched near their doom. Rumors of mutation following contact also circulated, that once you were bit, if you avoided being a snack, you too would eventually become a Wendigo. Wendigo, you go too. One such tale depicts it using tools and auto-cannibalism to survive. See, it's this tale about it taking a child, but the child wasn't big enough, so it's like the witch in the woods, like, I'm gonna fatten you up. So it carries the kid around for a while, but the kid figures out a way to trap it and cut its leg off and runs to the village, and they go back with it to find the creature, and it's there, like, sucking its own leg marrow, like... And they're like, kill it! And they like cut it to pieces and it like giggles and then it dies. And they're like, Hooray for the villagers. We never win against the monsters. Many of these tales metaphorically warn you about greed and gluttony. Something particularly dangerous to a community placed in a region where winter famine frequently causes death and still does to this day. Very real. So real, in fact, there's a place for it in modern psychiatry. It is known as Wendigo psychosis, which is characterized by an intense craving for flesh and a very real and gripping fear of becoming a cannibal, as well as some professionals suggesting insatiable greed and destruction of their environment also being related symptoms. It is widely considered culture-bound, or a folk illness, which is a combination of psychiatric and somatic symptoms, which are mostly considered specific to a certain culture or community. Sort of how certain regions have very specific folklore, and geography tends to make certain diseases and syndromes flourish. Some environments offer just the right breeding ground for many different invasive bacteria. And then there's the social way of thinking that kind of seeps in. If you don't clean your room, the boogeyman will get you. Then these ideas come together to create a mental mesh. I am sure we will see this relationship come up between these traits again and again as we study the darker side of cryptids and such legends. That is what the Witching Hour is all about. Studying fear and psychology through supernatural tales and experiences. Maybe we can find a way to explain some things, or maybe, just maybe, we will stumble across a deeper, darker truth. Join me next time as our Terror Tour continues. And hey, is that scratching on your window? Or in your mind?